Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Physician's Mind podcast, the show designed to engage the curious mind on the journey of lifelong learning and self-improvement in medicine and beyond. I'm your host, Curtis Wilkerson. I'm an incoming medical student, and in this episode, I spoke with Kayla Johnson. Kayla Johnson is the program manager for pre-professional advising at Arizona State University, my alma mater. Go Sun Devils. In this episode, Kayla and I discussed what it takes to get into medical school and what medical schools are looking for in their applicants, among various other things, including habits for success and other tips that will lead to optimized performance as a pre-medical student. So, if you found this episode helpful, please share with your friends on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Without further ado, here's my episode with Kayla Johnson. All right, so Kayla, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. So let's just start by having you explain what it is you do.
Yeah. So I am Kayla Johnson. I'm the pre-professional advising program manager at Arizona State University. That's a long title for saying I support pre-health and pre-law students and ASU alum going through the journey to become physicians, dentists, pharmacists, and then my new area is law as well. So that includes one-on-one appointments and also workshops and events and things to support them along that journey.
Awesome. And say this from firsthand experience. When I was a pre-med student, you were immensely helpful throughout the journey, and I'm excited to have you share some of your advice today. But first and foremost, I got to say, go Sun Devils. Now,
Go Sun Devils.
so let's just roll straight into this with the first question here. What is it that medical schools are looking for in students, and how can a pre-med student embody these traits?
Yeah, so the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, actually have competencies that medical schools are looking for. I'm not going to copy those, but it is very similar to what they're looking for. So the first thing is going to be academic excellence. Unfortunately, that's not always what students want to hear, but that is one of the first things admissions committees are looking at is this applicant going to be able to handle the academic rigor in medical school? So that's shown through GPA, science GPA, GPA trends, and then MCAT. So it's really important for students to build or develop those strong study habits and time management skills early on. They can embody these in their academics mostly. And then the MCAT prep and whatnot, which I know we're going to talk about later. So doing well in their sciences is very important. And those are going to have, as I mentioned, that separate GPA that they focus on. So academics is very important. The other area is commitment to service. This is a service-oriented profession. So students can do that through community service, outreach programs, serving underprivileged communities in various aspects, and that doesn't have to be healthcare related. Medical schools are also looking for strong communication skills, and that can be through a variety of different things. There are courses at every institution that you can take in a communication department, but you don't have to take specific communication courses. It can be through activities, jobs, research, anything that applicants are doing throughout their undergrad experience can be part of building those skills. Another one is empathy and compassion. Practicing those active listening skills. That is a big portion of being a physician, is listening to those patients to be able to do that problem solving. And so getting experiences in interacting with people who are different than them, have different life perspectives, is really important, and trying to understand their perspectives, because ultimately, the end of the day, you're going to be serving patients who are different than you also. And so understanding where they're coming from can be important. Leadership and teamwork is another one of those. You can gain that in some obvious areas. So leadership roles in clubs and organizations, community projects and jobs. But it's also showing initiative in group projects, whether that's in volunteering or extracurricular activities. It doesn't have to be a position or title per se. I mentioned the critical thinking and problem solving. That can be in various ways, but that's what physicians are there to do. They have the expertise and the knowledge in the content, but then they're trying to listen to the patient to solve the puzzle and come up with a solution. So commonly those skills are through research programs or projects, case studies, and then also through those real world experiences like internships or volunteer or job in the healthcare setting. Another one is being a lifelong learner. So the medical field is an ever-changing or ever-evolving industry. There's rapid advancements in knowledge and technology. And so people who are curious, want to learn more, it's not going to ever stop even after medical school. There's other stages in continually learning. The integrity and professionalism. So that comes in everything you do. And people are always watching. And so that might appear through your letters of recommendation. I mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but cultural competence. So you're going to be interacting with a variety of people from various backgrounds with different beliefs and values. And so connecting with people in the community that you live in, work in, is important from various backgrounds. And that could be through studying, that could be through traveling, it could be community engagement, but demonstrating the ability to work with and interact and value those people because of their diversity. And then the one that I love is medical schools are looking for you to be authentically you. There isn't a checkbox that you need to complete in order to get accepted. There's not a certain number of hours of shadowing. I mentioned this quite a few times when I talk with students. There's not these checkboxes that you fill. They want to get to know who you are through your application, through your experiences. And so when students ask me how many hours should I get of research, or is this enough? I usually flip the question to what are you interested in or interested in learning about? And it shifts it from the checkbox mentality of fulfilling these requirements to pursuing things you're passionate about. And those things that I just mentioned that being important for medical school will come out through those activities that you're passionate about.
Fantastic advice, and thank you for sharing. I love how you concluded with the point of authenticity because ultimately you have to pursue that which is important to you. You don't need to just do it because there's a checkbox, although, of course, there are some quote unquote checkbox parts of the application, right? You have to have your excellent grades, an excellent MCAT score, and you have to demonstrate that commitment to service. Thank you for sharing those traits that the med schools are looking for in the students. My next question would be, for a first-year student, what should they be thinking as a pre-med? What should they be planning for the future?
Yeah, I'll start with the first thing I talked about for the first question is building that strong academic foundation. It's usually not the answer first-year students want to hear or are hoping I respond with because they want to get involved in those activities. But building those strong study habits and time management skills will allow them to then add those other experiences as they advance through their undergrad degree. It's much easier to continue to maintain a strong GPA rather than struggling and trying to improve that GPA. So if you have one thing that you're focused on that first semester, it would be the strong academics. After that, that's when we can add in those other experiences. Not that they can't do that the first semester, just sometimes becomes a little bit overloaded and overwhelming. And we even see that with students who have experience, who are maybe coming back to college to complete prerequisites. We still recommend, focusing on those academics that first semester back into the university and taking classes and then doing those activities. So that strong academic foundation.
Well said. Set the standard high academically. Once that's squared away, you can begin to explore the other options.
Yep.
Now, on the topic of developing relationships with mentors and professors, this is a critical component of becoming competitive as a pre-medical student. How do you recommend a student connects with a professor in a big college classroom?
Yes, this is a common question we get and something that our advisors talk to students about all the time, from the beginning of pre-health all the way through applications. There's a ton of different areas, but I would say kind of on that authenticity aspect is it is sometimes weird to think about, but faculty and professors are humans at the end of the day. They have their own interests and their own hobbies. And so showing interest into getting to know them, getting to know their subject area, their research, and that can be through attending office hours. I would say, as an instructor myself, I rarely have students that come to office hours. And so when I do, they stand out. Some students will decide to become a teaching or a research assistant with faculty to get to know them beyond that classroom. Sometimes taking multiple classes with the same faculty can be challenging, but that would be another way to extend that time that you have with them in the particular classes. But most relationship building, not just with faculty, but all relationship building, goes beyond the academic classroom and doing well in the class, which I think a lot of times is, again, that checkbox mentality of I did well, I attended class. Whereas building relationship takes time and it takes effort and it's not done overnight. And so to expect to continually work to build that relationship is important. It's also good to remember it's one thing that our students don't like to do. They're afraid to do. It seems like an overwhelming piece of the application, but it is one of the first of many times they're going to do these letters of recommendation. So they'll have it for medical school applications. They'll have it for residency. They'll also have it when applying to their first attending position. And so it's a skill they can continually work on, is networking, building relationships throughout all of their activities.
Absolutely. And that networking and being able to build relationships extends far beyond the undergraduate curriculum. It basically lasts throughout the entire medical career. And I appreciate how you mentioned the importance of showing up to office hours because, in my experience, that was one of the best ways that helped me not only stand out, but build relationships with my professors because it's true that a small fraction of the students will consistently attend office hours. So, in terms of clubs and volunteering, how early should a student be looking into such opportunities and what kind of activities should they be looking at?
Yeah, I mentioned the strong academic foundation, so that would be first priority. After that, at any point, students can get involved in those other experiences. Some students do work while they're going to school, and those part-time jobs still serve value in that application. But getting involved in clubs and organizations, community service, healthcare experience, it's all great to do once you have that solid foundation in the academics. There's not a wrong timeline. A lot of students think there's specific times in which they should be doing experiences, a type of experience, or taking a particular course, but really their path is their own unique path. And so sometimes we encourage students to think about why they want to go into the profession. And that question can be quite overwhelming when you're a first year student. But if you're interested in going back to your rural community and serving that community, maybe you get involved in your area in which you're going to college in underserved communities. That might be through the community service aspect. If you're like, I want to meet with patients day in and day out, maybe let's get you started with clinical first. if you want to be the advancement of the profession and come up with these amazing medical solutions, then maybe research might be the first thing you do. But breaking down what you're hoping to do for your future application into smaller goals. So I actually teach a pre-health career course, and there's an activity I do with them. And the first step is evaluating what you're currently doing. And for some students, that might not be much, or it might be a full, a part-time job, or they're involved in one club and student organization. The second step is thinking big picture of what they want to have on that application, and then breaking that down into smaller steps so that they're not thinking, I have all these things I need to do, but there's manageable goals and steps to get to those smaller goals that will help them reach their end goal of what they want on their application. And that seems to help break down that overwhelming feeling just a little bit. It's definitely still there because there are a lot of expectations for the application. No, that was mostly it. Just it takes, your application is multiple years of experiences. And so thinking of it not happening overnight, again, it happens slowly. And so getting involved in one thing you're interested in when you feel confident in the academics, and then adding to that once you feel like you have additional time, but not feeling like you have to get involved in 4 things or a clinical job your first semester.
Absolutely. Taking it one step at a time. And I think that emphasizes the importance of remembering that it's not necessarily about that one moment where you get accepted into med school. It's not about that end goal. It's about enjoying each moment along the journey and not reducing the present moment as a means to an end, right? Enjoying each step along the way and breaking it down into digestible pieces as much as you can. So that's fantastic advice. Thanks for sharing. And my next question is going to involve clinical experience and shadowing. Why is clinical experience so important to have on your application? And how do you recommend students gain clinical experience?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. This is kind of one of those unspoken expectations that everyone has. First, I wanted to highlight there's a variety of ways you can get that experience. So includes, but not limited to, shadowing or observation, volunteer community service, working in the healthcare setting. Some institutions or universities like ASU has an internship program. So all of those are really great opportunities, but it demonstrates commitment to the field of medicine. And a lot of times students will start off by shadowing and really understanding what it's like, and then want to get more hands-on. And so that continued commitment to the field can be shown in all of those ways I mentioned. It provides exposure to patient care. Even if you have experience as a patient, it's good to see it from the side of a physician because it is drastically different. And so having that experience and exposure of whether that's observing or working with patients is really helpful to witness the diverse needs of patients and understand the importance of patient-centered care. Clinical experience allows you also to build on those skills I mentioned at the beginning of empathy, improving those communication skills, navigating complex relationships, those active listening skills if you're working directly with those patients, all important for the field you're going into. It also provides insight into the realities of medicine. I feel like a lot of times when I first started this position, I've been in it for almost 4 years now. When I started, I had a lot of students, reference medical shows, which I love medical shows, so I'm all on board. But there's a lot on TV or that you can read about that isn't the real picture or the full picture. And so understanding that medicine is demanding, a fast-paced and emotionally taxing field is important to get out of those experiences. It gives them a realistic view of what the medical career field or medical career entails, how to get there, and includes those challenges, emotional stress, ethical dilemmas that physicians face on a day-to-day basis. So gaining an understanding of excuse me, the physical, emotional, and mental demands of being a physician and their day-to-day responsibilities, how the healthcare system operates and structures and the dynamics of working in a team, because it's not in a bubble. Physicians are the lead in most teams, healthcare teams, but they do work collaboratively with a variety of different people in the hospital and healthcare system. So an example I have of this is I met with many students who want to serve underserved populations or provide free care. And while I love this in concept and I want that access to healthcare, them gaining real world experience to understand the complexities of healthcare insurance and why those problems are what they are is helpful for them to then make a plan moving forward when they pursue that career. So it's not perfect in knowing the reason you want to go into being a physician or being the physician, doing the role yourself, but the clinical experience is the closest way to pursue that. It also enhances your application of the practical knowledge. So providing those concrete examples in your personal statement, interviews, and application essays, a lot of the application, about half, is actually reflective writing. And we talk about this concept of showing versus telling. And that showing doesn't have to be flowery language of in the middle of a night on a dark, glooming December, colder than usual night, right? So we're not doing the creative writing necessarily, but it is telling your stories that you've experienced to allow you to show admissions committees that you have empathy, that you've worked on your communication skills. Whereas I can say I have empathy and communication skills. Anyone can say that. But through those stories and those concrete examples from your personal experiences in the clinical field allows it to be more impactful for applications and admissions committees. So it adds that depth to your narrative, and showing that you've not only researched the field, but you've critically thought about your reason to go into the field and pursued it and shown, again, that commitment to medicine. The clinical experience also allows opportunity for network. You talked about network and mentorship, and developing those skills I mentioned earlier. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. I think you highlighted why clinical experience is important because it demonstrates that you know what it is you're getting into. And as a pre-med student, you ultimately have to be prepared to answer the question, perhaps during an interview, how have your clinical experiences reinforced your desire to go to medicine? You mentioned in your personal statement and application, those experiences can add some depth and some credibility to support the desires which you claim to be behind your motivations to go to medical school. So clinical experience, extremely important, pretty much a non-negotiable for a pre-med student.
Yes.
Now, on the flip side, why is it important for a student to have hobbies or extracurricular activities outside of medicine?
So this goes back to what I talked about earlier of authentically showing who you are. This is a great area to showcase to admissions committees who you are, what's important to you. Physicians, just like any other professional, has interests and hobbies outside of a job. Similar to how we talked about faculty and professors, it's sometimes challenging to see beyond their profession and the overwhelming sense of their knowledge and expertise in an area, but ultimately they have those interests and hobbies outside. So it's important for you to develop those. It also helps with reducing burnout and balancing, providing balance. It's a really demanding expectations of the application and the journey. And so participating in those activities that are of interest to you beyond medicine can allow for you to recharge and really get through all of those demanding expectations. It could be playing a sport, it could be a creative hobby, and it can be a bunch of different things. There isn't a list of experiences in which, say, pick one of these hobbies. I've had students talk about being sneakerheads, and so they collect sneakers and they go to sneaker conventions. I've had people talk about, board games are really important to them, and so they've done experiences in which they can teach people their favorite board games. So there's not necessarily one way or one thing that fits everyone, but it's really doing those things that are interesting to you. It also allows for personal growth and self-discovery. Medical school is challenging, and self-awareness and emotional maturity are important for coping with the stress, and making those thoughtful decisions. And so engaging in diverse activities in passion develops resilience and helps you grow personally. So really important for new skills, meeting diverse people, experiences, situations, and perspectives that are different from you. It also, depending on the experience, could show commitment to helping others. So I mentioned the student that, taught board games to other people, or it could be, I've had, students who are really artistically talented and want to provide that in a hospital sense. And so they might do crafts with the children who are undergoing chemo. And so, not again thinking of it in this bubble, but using those passions to help other people is also an extra mile you can go in using those things and skills, just like you will as a physician in using that knowledge and skills to help people. And then it gives you a broader perspective on life and health. I mentioned medicine or being a physician isn't in a bubble or a vacuum. It's really understanding the broader concept of the human experience, and that includes cultural, social, psychological aspects. And so helping you become an empathetic and well-rounded physician are those other extracurricular activities.
Well said. You've got to be well-rounded. You've got to show interest in some normal things because ultimately you have to also be a normal person who's well-balanced. And
Yes.
during your interviews, if you have something interesting, a couple of things you mentioned, like the sneakerhead guy or the board game person, those are interesting things. Somebody on the interview committee is more than likely going to be more interested in that weird, unique thing you've got on your application than they would be your research or your clinical work, just to be honest. I mean, I was a big country swing dancer throughout college. We would go out all the time to these country bars and go dancing. And, we also built a chicken coop in my buddy's residential backyard in the college town. And I put both of those things on my application, and I was asked questions about those in several interviews. So doing things outside of the medical world that you actually like to do that's unique to you is a great thing to include on the application. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing some of that info.
Yeah.
Now, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, along those same lines, my brother is a first year resident for ER medicine. And one of his residency interviews was all about his adrenaline junkie habits of bungee jumping and skydiving, and his research in the Philippine Islands that ended up in a war zone. Like, that's all they talked about during his interview. He didn't talk about anything medical related. So, that sometimes helps you connect with other people too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's like as long as you don't have any red flags, you kind of meet the criteria for GPA and your MCAT and whatever else, you're pretty much good. If you've got some interesting things to talk about, you're well set. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that one as well. Another interesting
Yeah.
point. Your brother definitely sounds, you said it was your brother, right?
Yep.
First year resident. Yeah. You've shared some info about him with me previously. He definitely sounds like an interesting guy.
He is. He's an ER physician for sure.
So we've clearly established the importance of having strong academic foundations. Now, what do you think a student's GPA should be roughly, and how might they set some goals to effectively reach that goal?
Yeah, I'll start with the national average, and I preface it being an average because people get accepted with GPAs or MCATs that are lower. So for AMCAS, which is going to be for our allopathic schools, it's a 3.68 science GPA. I mentioned that science GPA is really important. And so doing well on those sciences and that building that academic rigor. MCAT average for accepted applicants is a 512. That is a little bit different for our osteopathic schools. Osteopathic average accepted is a 506 MCAT with a 3.47 science GPA. So I say those numbers also to say the MCAT's out of 528. I've never met an applicant who has a 528 MCAT. I've met students who have a 4.0, but a 4.0 GPA isn't a direct acceptance to medical school. All of the things we've talked about today, including the academics, or beyond the academics, I should say, are equally as important. They need that strong science foundation because of the curriculum, but it's not everything. So a 4.0 for someone who isn't able to communicate their previous experiences or reflect on them or able to show empathy to other people and experiences, they might be denied from a medical school even though they have a 4.0 GPA. And an average shows that you don't have to have a 4.0 to get in either. So I like to mention those because it seems more achievable. But I mentioned the academics being that strong foundation because medical schools want to make sure that you're going to do well in the curriculum for medical school and later pass those licensure exams. So that's why they look really highly at that GPA and MCAT. So for instance, in medical school, the one semester of biochemistry here at ASU is taught in one day. So it moves very quickly. And so doing well on those sciences, they're not trying to make you jump through a hoop. They're wanting to make sure that you're scaffolding, building on taking multiple sciences so that when you get into medical school and you're taking 26 to 32 credits that first semester, you're not as overwhelmed as if you didn't continually prepare for that. So if you're in your first semester and you're not taking a science or you're only in one science, that's okay. We can build up to those two sciences and making sure that you're enrolled in multiple, like a full load of courses. That does differ per applicant. So we have students we work with, we have ASU online degrees who work full-time jobs. And so a full load of classes looks different for them. And we definitely work with them. And that's not discredited on the application by any means. They look at the full picture. The entrance exam for medical school, which is the MCAT, the medical college admissions test, which our pre-health students hate, of course. It's a dreading exam, but it is the first of many standardized exams that they will take. And so it's roughly about 7.5 hours. And you'll take multiple licensure exams during medical school and complete them in residency. That will be 8 hours that cover way more content than the MCAT covers in all of those licensure exams. And so, again, they're not trying to make you jump through these hoops of having these expectations for you, but they really are trying to set you up for success for that next area. Did that answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Okay.
think it's valuable for a student to know that just because you don't have, or just because you do have that 4.0 GPA, if you're lacking in other aspects of your application and you're just a robot, it's not going to lead to success. You've got to be well-rounded. You've got to be personable. You've got to be a nice guy, nice gal, um, and just be able to have a good conversation and truly express your interest beyond just academic success, like success in the laboratory. You have to be a personal individual as well. And
Yes.
that's just the way it is. And each step along the way, whether it's the MCAT or whether it's the coursework you're taking, is designed to prepare you for, like you mentioned, the next step. And if you look at it like that, as you approach the MCAT, as you approach your coursework, you can think of it as, okay, I'm developing the skills and these competencies so that when it comes time for medical school, I'll be even more prepared to excel. So, absolutely. Now, in regards to the MCAT, what should a student know about signing up for it, preparing for it, and really stepping into test day to do well? I know a lot of students get nervous about that a little prematurely because typically a student's not going to take it till their junior or perhaps senior year. So, what would your advice be in that regard?
Yeah, there's a lot. I just met with a first year student, first semester student earlier today who wanted to talk about MCAT. I'm like, okay, we'll slow down, but we can definitely talk about what to expect and prepare you that way, but not start studying that early. So there's a few things of kind of like logistical things I like people to know about the MCAT that they might not know. So one is registration for the MCAT happens significantly in advance. So significantly in advance is dates for, I'll use 2025 as an example. Dates in January through June of 2025. Registration occurred October 2nd, 2024. The spring is pretty common for applicants to want to take the MCAT, so it does fill up fairly quickly. There's also dates in July through September, and that registration opens up in February. And so that does require some planning ahead on your part, or on the student's part, to make sure that timing matches for when you're wanting to take it and back it up for when you're wanting to study. You can also, it's not called a wait list on the MCAT registration, but there is a section in which you can be notified if someone changes their MCAT date. This is fairly common. So you can put your name on 5 wait lists to get notified if it's not the right location, if you wanted to take it on a different day, and that's full. So that is another option. Another piece of the logistical timeline is it takes 30 to 35 days to get your MCAT score. So if you're wanting to have it by the time you apply, you'll want to keep that in mind of your timing piece. The other side, so I talk about timing from application working backwards. The other piece of working towards the MCAT is completing the courses in which are tested on the MCAT. We recommend having taken those college classes of general biology, general physics, general or inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, biochemistry, psychology, and sociology before you sit for that exam. You can teach yourself. Every student I've interacted with who has taught themselves specifically biochemistry because of the sequence of courses, they regret studying it on their own before taking the course. It is a lot of content. It's a challenging course. So I usually recommend thinking about that when you're thinking about the timeline piece as well. Students, the studying varies. I wish sometimes I could give you a structured, again, checklist that says if you do this, you're going to do well on the MCAT. That doesn't exist. So every student's timeline and path or content is going to look a little different. Usually speaking, people study 4 to 6 months for the MCAT. Kaplan's number, if you will, is going to be 300 hours. So if you're studying 10 hours a week, you're studying for 30 weeks is kind of their simplistic method. Now, again, that's not a checkbox of I sat in front of books for 10 hours. It really is going through the content. We don't recommend studying any more than a year before the exam. I mentioned that I had the first year student earlier talking with me. There are some things that you can do, and I'll mention them in a second here. But the MCAT is wanting you to know a lot of topics, but only a little bit about each topic. And so if you're studying more than a year, that information is no longer in your short-term memory, which makes it much more challenging to pull it out for your actual exam. So the two, I would say, big things about the MCAT that you could do early on, there are MCAT questions of the day. Kaplan and Shemeshian Consulting has some questions of the day. One of them can be emailed to you. I get them every day. It takes 5 minutes, so you get to know the questions, how they're structured, and it also explains if the answer was correct or why the answer was wrong. So those are simple things you could do without doing a bunch of studying ahead of time. The other is going to be for the CARS section, the critical analysis and reasoning section. So reading long passages that they don't have to be healthcare related, that's going to help you on that CARS section. So that's another thing you could do, reading one long passage a week or every other week during your undergrad can help with that. You do a lot of reading in college, but really understanding what that article is saying at ASU, and I think similarly across the nation for universities, they might offer a subscription to some sort of magazine or newspaper. Our students receive the New York Times for free, and so that's what I recommend, reading those long articles to kind of get in that habit. The other one for thinking about that right study package or program for them, there isn't one size fits all. There's a ton of programs out there. They vary in the study method, finances, and a bunch of other things. So the two things that I recommend when thinking about what MCAT package is right for you or program is financial constraints, because at the end of the day, it's sad that it is this way, but you could spend endless amounts of money on the MCAT. And most of us don't have that money. And so thinking about what that budget is for you. And then the second is how you learn best. If you don't do well in group settings, a structured program in which you're with a group of students is not going to go well for you. And so those two are the biggest things that I recommend thinking about when finding that right MCAT package for you. The other common thing we hear from students is that they spent too much time doing content review in those, whether it's a program, a do-it-yourself, but that they didn't spend enough time on those full-length practice exams. They do take a lot of time because they are that 7.5 hours, but they do allow you to understand the length of the official exam, how to prepare for sitting for that day, and it also is the best indicator of how you're going to do on the day of exam. So we usually recommend 10 plus full-length practice exams throughout that studying of your MCAT. So that gets you registration, prep, and then stepping into the day of the exam. Don't study the night before or cram the night before. It doesn't do much. Get sleep. That's much more important to be able to think critically about those questions. You didn't have the knowledge the night before, you won't the day of, and that's okay. There's some things that you can use those critical thinking skills that are much more important. So getting that sleep. Review what you need to bring. There are certain things you can and cannot bring. And so knowing what that is, where the location is that you're taking it, making sure you're arriving early. There are breaks between the sections, and some students want to get through the exam as quickly as possible rather than taking those breaks. But we highly recommend taking those, getting some fresh air, using the restroom, whatever that might be. And then following the exam is really taking a break, enjoying the moment. It's a big accomplishment, and then reflecting on how it went. Some people share their experiences. That's up to you if that's something you feel comfortable with. But really, it is a big accomplishment, especially in this journey. So taking a moment to appreciate that.
100%. And I think you covered some amazing topics in relation to the MCAT. Really honing in on the timing. There's a proper time to sort of be considering the MCAT, in particular, making sure you have taken all of the proper courses because I have a personal story as well that relates to that. I wish I had taken genetics and physics too because I remember looking at all my practice tests and seeing equations like Ohm's law, which once you learn it, it's actually very simple. V equals IR, or like genetic nomenclature, which was, it's like amino acid. I honestly don't remember it at this point. But when I took genetics, I was like, wow, this is so much easier than I thought it was. And I just kind of like took a calculated loss on the MCAT for those courses. So definitely important to actually take all of the courses if possible. And it really does require you to know a lot about a lot, I guess, but it knows to know a little about a lot. That's kind of what the MCAT is. And developing those great habits, like you mentioned, reading consistently, perhaps once or more per week, some article, and doing those daily practice questions just to kind of keep your mind sharp throughout the journey. And once it comes time to practice and take the real test, you just practice like you play. So you take several practice exams, you develop the right habits, and then you lock in on test day. And I think one thing I haven't really mentioned it or asked you about it, but I think it's important to emphasize having a good, strong network of friends to surround you throughout all these times. I mean, I had a couple buddies that I would call after every single practice test when I would walk back to my car. I would share with them how it went, you know. If I did poorly, I'd be like, "All right." They would lift me up. They'd be like, "Perfectly fine. You know, we'll get it in next time. We're good." I would call these guys after every single test. And in fact, on the day of my MCAT, they did a tailgate. So I walk out of my test, and there we got some hot dogs. We got the truck bed open. We got music playing, and we just celebrated. So just having a good, solid group of friends too, very important. So
Yes.
the MCAT's a beast, and once again, you have to conquer that challenge, and you have to sharpen yourself to prepare for the next challenge. So that really takes us into a nice segue into my next question. How important is it to have resilience and grit throughout the pre-med journey?
It's important in really any aspect of life, but it's very important in that pre-med journey. I talk about, when meeting with students, I talk about this ideal world. This ideal world does not exist because people get sick, family passes away, you lose a job, whatever that might be. But always making a plan and having that plan and being adaptable to adjust that plan. Inevitably, you're going to come along multiple challenges in this journey. And that could be getting a bad grade on a test or a course or struggling to find shadowing or research. But those are all things that it matters more about how you go through that challenge and how you overcome the challenge than the actual challenge itself. So that resilience and grit is really important. And with all of those challenges, when they occur, not if, they will, keeping in mind that why. We talked about, that importance of knowing your why and developing that throughout your journey. But usually it's that why that allows you to persist and push forward because that's what you want. If you think you want this journey and it's not actually what you want, it is going to be a lot harder to have that resilience and grit because it's not something you're truly passionate about. And so that is a huge aspect of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Life is not perfect. There are all sorts of circumstances that arise that are totally beyond our control. We really just have to focus on doing the best we can at the things that we can control and really finding our why. And I think that relates to pretty much everything we've talked about, especially with clinical experiences and other sort of extracurriculars, because they help you find the true deep seated reason why you're putting yourself through this grinder to get into medical school, because it's hard, it's not easy. And you've got to have that deep seated why, because that's what's going to push you through those tough times. That's what's going to uplift you when things aren't necessarily going your way. And you just have to embrace it. You've got to love it. You've got to live it, breathe it. That's what it's all
Yep.
about. Now,
Yes.
as we wrap up here, Kayla, do you have any last pieces of advice that we may not have covered throughout this interview?
I do. I have a few different things. One thing, and I've touched on some of these, but wanted to make sure really that they were highlighted, is it's really easy to compare yourself to others on the same journey, but do your best not to. Because as I mentioned, your journey is your own journey. It's you, authentically you. It's as hard as it is, get off of the Student Doctor Network or Med Reddit. You'll hear other pre-health students talking about what they've done, but it really is your own unique journey of your experiences reflecting on those. Med schools are not looking for the same applicant to fill all of their seats. In fact, they want your personality, your struggles, your journey to be shown on that application rather than trying to fit a mold that doesn't exist. We talked about, students asking how many hours of what experiences. It's much more about the quality versus the quantity. They're not necessarily looking at the number of hours in an activity. They spend more time reviewing, and there's more space on the application to share what you've learned, how you've grown, and the impact of those experiences, rather than the single space on the application that's for the number of hours. So pursuing those meaningful experiences, staying open-minded. We talked about life happening, of that adaptability aspect, but the career field is really broad, the healthcare career field. And so there might be things that you didn't know existed, or opportunities that you never thought of or considered. And so keeping an open mind and being open to those other things. I have a story that I love to tell. One of the first students I worked with, I was her first year advisor when she came to ASU. She came in with a solid plan. She wanted to double major in biochemistry and forensic science to later apply to medical school. So we met early and often to create this plan, to talk through activities and how she was, going through these things and her progress. And when COVID hit, she had a very difficult time finding medical related patient care experiences, which was the reality for everyone, really. However, she was able to get placed in a dental internship. I say this because she's now a second year dental student. She had no intention of going to dental school, but she really enjoyed that activity, and she had no intention of initially doing that experience. And so you can always make a plan, but being open-minded of, it might be a specialty that you're really hyper focused on, but not thinking about everything else that exists. You might not even know some of the specialties that exist in medicine, and there's new ones that keep coming up. And so being open-minded, and we've talked about this throughout the entire interview, but enjoying the journey. It is a journey. It's not going to happen quickly, and it isn't something that you can check box off. There's many challenges, and it's not going to be easy. So getting involved in and getting involved in and staying involved in experiences that bring you joy, traveling, using those breaks to really refresh and reset are all part of that journey.
Fantastic advice. Don't compare yourself to others. Really find what it is that motivates you to do what you're doing and pursue that relentlessly, because that's ultimately what's going to make you unique. And you never know when something's going to change. So always keep an open mind. Kayla, thank you so much for sharing your advice. You are a great leader and a true inspiration to those who are interested in the medical career. So, again, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure your wisdom will be helpful to many.
Thank you so much for having me.